Since episode 3, we've been using Express in our application. The main pain it solved for us was how excruciating routing a request to the correct handler was. I mean, it was bad. But Express does more for us than just routing. In episode 5, we introduced Express's concept of middleware. Middleware takes repetitive tasks such as user authentication and pulls them out of our main request flow. Could we use middleware to do more than just abstract common operations out of our request? Could middleware clean up the entire request response flow? In this episode, we'll find out that indeed it can. Let's review quickly what an Express middleware is. There are two types. First, there's the standard middleware, which is just a function that has 3 parameters. The first argument passed to your function represents the HTTP request, the second represents your response to that request, and the third is the continuation we can invoke to let Express know that our middleware is done. Remember, failing to call next results in the request hanging and the client not getting a response. Our request handlers have essentially been middleware functions where we just dropped next because 1, JavaScript lets us do that with functions, and 2, we were for sure going to handle the request in that function. The other type of middleware is the error handling kind. An error handling middleware must have an arity of 4 like so. It is having 4 parameters that tells Express this middleware function is meant to handle errors. The error argument received will be the result of a previous middleware having called next with something other than null as the first argument in the call. For example, if I were loading a character, I might have a middleware that looks something like this. Now I'm hand-waving over mysterious DB here, but it's how this function retrieves things. In our callback past defined character, we have 2 possible errors to check for. The first is something catastrophic going wrong with the find. Maybe the database isn't accessible or something. We call next with that error, notice the return so that we break out of the function. Our other check is to make sure we have the character. If we don't, we come up with a new error and call next with that, again with return for the same reason. Code is just an arbitrary property I set on error so that I have some way to reference what type of error I'm dealing with later. Having called next with either error, Express would switch over to using error handling middleware to handle the request. Let's see how that works. Imagine we have the following middleware. Notice the arity of 4. Now inside the function, we first check to see if error.code is the type of error we're looking for. I think it's good practice to only handle one type of error in an error handling middleware. It makes it much more clear what's going on, and a route declaration can have as many error handlers as we care to add. If it wasn't the character not found error, then we punt to the next one. If the error leaves all of our code without being handled, Express has a default error handler that will return a 500 for us, unless we supplied a catch-all. We'll see more about that when we get to the new app structure. If this is the error we were looking for, notice that we're able to send a response from this middleware. That's the same res object that a so-called request handler would see. We can send the response here, cleanly handling the error. As long as we don't also call next, the request is handled and Express is none the wiser. So that's error handling middleware in depth. Let's see how these concepts make our code better. Open up app, routes, portal, charactersroutes.js and scroll to the function show. This function is a mess. It knows how to interact with the database and render a response to our client. Does that sound like not separating concerns to you? Because it sure does to me. Also, if we look at its route declaration and config routes portal.js, we see portal router route, a get and a put. And all we can really tell is that we've indirected our flow without adding any information. For example, does this route handle errors? We really have to read and understand the code to figure out what it does, but using middleware can help us. Let's move our earlier middleware into a middleware file. Open app, middlewares, loadcharacter.js. We add our code from above. The only difference here is that we filled out the do something comment from before. Then we define another middleware file, app, middlewares, character not found error.js. This isn't the final way of rendering the error, but it's slightly better than what we had before. At least we're using a 404 now. Anyway, we can now make our route declaration read very clearly. First, we get access to our 2 middlewares. Simply load character, app middleware load character, var character not found error equals app middleware character not found error. Then we could change our route declaration to look something like this. Let's pop in load character before show, and then character not found error after it. Notice the difference. Now it's very clear exactly what happens when we hit portal characters ID. We load the character, and then we show it. And if for some reason we didn't find it, we clearly see that we handle that error. And here's some more bang for your buck. Check out what happens with the original handler in app routes portal characters routes.js. All this becomes, boom, Since we stashed our character on rec.view in load character, that object now contains all our rendering context. Show's job is now to be a request handler. It renders a response to the user. By the time your request flow gets to the handler should get to assume that all error checking happened and that all the data it needs to render a response is in place. It now has one job, and a function ought to have only one job. The middleware stack's power is that it abstracts away from us the control flow of dealing with multiple operations and error handling, providing us with the framework to use some tight, concise functions. Those functions will be less prone to bugs, and they'll be easier to test when we do have bugs. This use of middleware sets us up for the better way of handling request validation we alluded to in the last episode. It's also going to be the cornerstone of our better app architecture that we'll get to in coming episodes. Until next time, happy coding.